Amaka and Chinedu had been married for just 6 months, but trouble had already entered their home. At first, their love was sweet, like fresh palm wine, bubbling with laughter and joy. But soon, Amaka started noticing strange things about her husband. Chinedu, who used to rush home after work, suddenly started coming home late. When she asked, he would say, "I was with my friends." But Amaka knew something was wrong. He smelled different, sometimes like fresh grass, other times like something she could not explain. One night, she decided to check his phone. But Chinedu had changed his password. That was when Amaka became convinced her husband was seeing another woman. She started watching him closely. At night, he would wake up and leave the bed, only to return hours later. One time, she followed him quietly, but he just stepped outside for a few minutes and came back. What was he hiding? One Saturday, Chinedu told her he was traveling for work and would return on Sunday evening. Amaka pretended to believe him, but she had a plan. She would find out the truth. That night, she left the house but didn't go far. Instead, she waited outside, hiding near the window. After an hour, she heard movement inside. Slowly, she tiptoed to the door and pushed it open. What she saw made her heart stop. There, in their bed, was Chinedu, but he was not with a woman. He was with a goat. Amaka gasped, and Chinedu turned sharply, his eyes filled with shock and fear. "Jesus!" Amaka screamed. "What is this?" But Chinedu only stared at her, breathing heavily, as if he had been caught in the middle of something too terrible to explain. Amaka stood frozen at the door, her heart pounding like a talking drum. Her eyes refused to believe what they were seeing. Chinedu, her husband, the man she had vowed to spend her life with, was lying in bed with a goat. "Chinedu!" She screamed again, her voice shaking. "What is this madness?" Chinedu jumped up from the bed, his face covered in sweat. The goat bleated and tried to run, but its legs were tied. "Amaka, it's not what you think," Chinedu stammered, reaching for his trousers. "Not what I think. So what is it?" Amaka's body shook with anger and confusion. "You've been sneaking around, lying to me. And for what? A goat?" Chinedu opened his mouth, but no words came out. Amaka grabbed a broom from the corner and charged at him. "You must be possessed. I will beat that evil spirit out of you today." The goat jumped off the bed and ran under the table, making strange noises. "Amaka, please, lower your voice," Chinedu begged, his hands raised as he backed away. "People will hear you. Let them hear. In fact, let me call Mama and tell her the kind of husband I married." Amaka picked up her phone. "This is not ordinary, Chinedu. You need deliverance." Chinedu's face turned pale. He grabbed her hand before she could dial. "Amaka, please, I will explain everything." She pulled away. "You better start talking before I pour hot water on you and that useless goat." Chinedu sighed heavily, rubbing his face. He sat on the edge of the bed, looking defeated. "Amaka, I didn't choose this life." Amaka folded her arms, her chest rising and falling. "So who chose it for you?" "The devil." Chinedu looked at her, his eyes dark and filled with something she couldn't place. "It started before I married you. In my village, we have a secret, something nobody talks about." Amaka felt her skin grow cold. "What secret?" Chinedu hesitated, then looked at the goat, which was now staring at them like it understood everything. Then, in a low voice, he said, "This is not just an ordinary goat." Amaka took a step back, her breathing uneven. She looked from Chinedu to the goat, and for a moment, She felt like she was in a nightmare. What do you mean it's not an ordinary goat? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Chinedu ran a hand over his head, his eyes filled with something close to shame. Amaka, I didn't want you to find out this way. This goat, it's not just an animal. He swallowed hard. It's my wife. For a moment, silence filled the room. Amaka stared at him, blinking rapidly. Then she let out a sharp, bitter laugh. You're what? She asked, shaking her head as if she had misheard him. My wife, Chinedu repeated, his voice almost breaking. Before I married you, I was already married to her. He pointed at the goat. Amaka's knees suddenly felt weak. She grabbed the wall for support. Chinedu, are you mad? Chinedu lowered his head. I didn't have a choice. Amaka shook her head violently. You mean to tell me you left your village, came to the city, married me, and all this time, you had a goat wife? Do I look like a fool to you? Tears welled in Chinedu's eyes. Amaka, it's not what you think. This is a generational curse in my family. Every first son must marry a spirit wife before marrying a human woman. Amaka's skin went cold. Spirit wife. She looked at the goat again. For the first time, she noticed something strange about its eyes. They were too human, almost like they were watching her closely. Chinedu continued, his voice low and shaky. It's an ancient tradition in my village. If I don't keep her close, terrible things will happen to me. To us. Amaka gripped her chest. She felt like she couldn't breathe. Chinedu, you're telling me that all this time, I've been living with a man who sleeps with a. She couldn't bring herself to say it. Chinedu nodded slowly. I didn't want this, Amaka. But I had no choice. Amaka's eyes darted around the room as her mind rested. Then, suddenly, the goat let out a deep, unnatural sound, almost like laughter. Amaka screamed. The goat slowly turned its head toward her, and in a voice that sent chills down her spine, it spoke. You should have never found out. Amaka's blood ran cold. The room spun around her as she pressed herself against the wall, her heart hammering in her chest. The goat had spoken. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her body refused to move, frozen in fear. Chinedu dropped to his knees. Amaka, please, don't be afraid, he begged. She won't hurt you. But Amaka wasn't listening. Her eyes were fixed on the goat, its lips still twisted in an eerie smile. How did it just talk? She finally managed to whisper. The goat took a slow step toward her, its hooves clicking against the floor. I have always been here, watching, waiting, it said, its voice low and almost mocking. But you were not supposed to know. Amaka screamed again, grabbing the nearest object, a stool, and throwing it at the animal. The goat dodged it with an unnatural speed, its eyes never leaving hers. Chinedu, what in God's name is this? Amaka cried, tears streaming down her face. Chinedu stood up slowly, his face full of guilt. Amaka, please, listen to me. She is not just a goat. Her name is Oluchi. She is my first wife, chosen for me before I was even born. Amaka shook her head. No. This is madness. You are telling me you are married to this thing? Chinedu nodded, his eyes pleading. It's not just me, Amaka. Every first son in my family must take a spirit wife before marrying a human woman. If we don't, we die. Amaka felt her knees buckle. She grabbed the bedpost to steady herself. You're lying, she whispered. This is some kind of evil. Chinedu, we have to go to a pastor. This is not normal. But the goat, Oluchi, let out a sharp laugh, sending chills down Amaka's spine. A pastor, it said mockingly. You think a pastor can break a blood covenant? Amaka looked at Chinedu in terror. Blood covenant. Chinedu lowered his head. It's the price we pay for power, for wealth, for survival. If I reject her now, she will kill me. Amaka's hands flew to her mouth as a fresh wave of horror washed over her. Jesus Christ. Oluchi took another step forward. Now that you know the truth, Amaka, it said, its voice growing colder, you have a choice to make. Amaka's breath hitched. What? What choice? The goat's lips curled into a wicked smile. Accept me, or watch your husband die. Amaka's body trembled as she stared at the creature before her. A goat? No. A spirit, claiming to be her husband's first wife. The air in the room felt heavy, suffocating. She turned to Chinedu, desperation in her eyes. We have to fight this. We can't live like this. Chinedu shook his head, tears glistening in his eyes. Amaka, you don't understand. If I reject her, I will die. Oluchi, the spirit goat, let out a soft laugh. At least he understands his fate. But you, Amaka, must decide yours. Amaka's mind raced. If she accepted this nightmare, she would forever live in a house with a man who shared his bed with a creature. But if she refused, would Chinedu really die? No, she refused to believe that. She closed her eyes and whispered a silent prayer. She had always believed in God's power. If this was truly a spiritual battle, then only God could save them. She opened her eyes, her fear replaced with determination. I reject you, Oluchi, in the name of Jesus. The moment she spoke, the room grew cold. Oluchi let out a sharp, ear-piercing scream that shook the entire house. The lights flickered, and the air crackled with unseen energy. Chinedu clutched his chest, gasping. Amaka, I can't breathe. Amaka ran to him, holding his face. You will not die. God is greater than any spirit. Chinedu, pray with me. Chinedu's eyes widened with fear as Oluchi's form began to shift. The goat's body twisted, its flesh rippling as a dark mist rose from it. Slowly, it transformed into the figure of a woman, tall, dark-skinned, with fiery eyes that burned with rage. I gave you everything, Oluchi hissed. Your wealth, your protection, and now, you betray me. Amaka held Chinedu tightly and shouted, the blood of Jesus is against you. Oluchi shrieked as her body began to break apart. The walls trembled, and the ground beneath them cracked. Shadows swirled around her, pulling her into a growing void. No, Oluchi screamed, you cannot break the covenant. With one final, deafening cry, she vanished into the darkness. Silence filled the room. The house stopped shaking. The air became warm again. Chinedu collapsed into Amaka's arms, sobbing. She's gone. She's finally gone. Amaka held him tightly, tears streaming down her face. Yes, she's gone. But we need prayers, Chinedu. Serious prayers. He nodded, still shaking. I will go to church. I will confess everything. And he did. Chinedu sought deliverance. And with time, the darkness that had haunted him disappeared. His family's curse was broken through fasting, prayers, and faith. Their marriage, once tainted by a terrible secret, became stronger. And Amaka never stopped thanking God for saving her husband from the spirit that had controlled him for so long. The nightmare was over. Thank you for watching and please don't forget to hit the